Welcome to the Visiting Speaker Series. I'm so glad you could all join us this afternoon for the amazing talk by the amazing bloggers Jerome Armstrong and Markos Zuniga, who write the Daily Kos and Jerome's fabulous blog, which is called
Mighty D.
Mighty D. They've done some really interesting work and some really interesting thinking around how do the new grassroots within our political structure in the United States work? Do these new technologies actually create a space where different types of people are having a new political voice? Do these types of structures help people actually get together and become a true force politically? And these are very interesting things. I think many people think the jury is still out on this. And I'm just so pleased that we could have these two experts come in this afternoon to chat with us about their work and about their new book. So please help me welcome Markos and Jerome.
Thank you. I'm Jerome and Markos.
You guys don't have to use that.
Okay, we don't? Okay, great. That's a great segue. Thanks, Tamara. And in terms of where Markos and I came into this whole new phenomenon, and I think we can look at the internet as an opening to many more voices than were present, was within the political arena. Following the 2000 election, both of us got involved in politics, sort of ramping up. And before that, neither of us had a pedigree or political experience in terms of working on campaigns or elections, or had even a poli-sci degree. Although you had a bachelor's in politics.
I did.
He was a step ahead of me. But we both became, there was a vacuum out there in terms of partisan voices on the Democratic side, and voices in general that were authentic and that reflected politics from the point of view of ordinary people instead of from the point of view of either journalists that were covering politics from their particular standpoint for years on in, or from politicians and parties that have become ossified and sort of used to a certain way of the media presenting their elections and campaigns. And so we stepped into that vacuum and quickly found that there was a lot of people out all across the nation that were interested in hearing an authentic voice, but not only that, they were interested in participating by commenting not only with us, but the other people in the blogs in this new way of political dialogue. And from there, it's grown to where we were involved with the Howard Dean campaign, and the blogs have grown tenfold since then, to where now Markos' blog, Daily Kos, gets over 500,000 visitors today. So we wrote this book coming out of the 2004 election, with the Democrats having lost, and from our opinion, George Bush was one of the worst presidents ever in his first term. And we felt that John Kerry had all the things on his side. The polls showed the issue-wise that the people agreed with where the Democratic Party were on the issues. They agreed that the nation was going in the wrong direction, but the Democratic Party lost nonetheless. And so we set out to travel all around the country. We went to 20 different states, interviewed 160 people, and what we started out originally with as an idea was that the Democratic Party lacked a brand, but we quickly went much deeper than that. And what we really found out was there were structural problems with how the Democratic Party was operating at the campaign and election level in terms of organizing. And those are the things that we wrote about in the book. And our voices, given the amount that the audience has increased, has allowed us to sort of become gate crashers into the system that is ossified within the Democratic Party, and hopefully bring about a change there. So I'll let Markos speak now.
Yeah,
we'll just go back and forth. We're kind of
yeah. No, thanks for coming. And you know, I actually wanted to be a programmer when I grew up, but I wasn't good at it. So it's always been my shame that I couldn't do what you guys are doing. And I like talking to technical audiences because we don't have to explain what a blog is, and we don't have to explain what that computer internet thingy is. So it's kind of nice. And the questions we get are usually a lot more interesting. And I mean, this is weird for me to say, but I'm actually more interested in the technology side of the blogging than I am in the blogging itself. And given how, I guess, successful I have been with the blogging, I get more of a thrill doing a technical upgrade to the site that allows the site to scale more and to grow larger communities than I do about, breaking a story or taking, really getting a scalp against the right wing. I mean, to me, what's exciting is the aggregation of communities. I like to say that I don't consider myself a leader. What I do consider myself is somebody who's creating the infrastructure and the machinery to allow leaders to emerge and allow those leaders to be supported, and in a way that was not possible just a few short years ago. I mean, previously you had to be part of this establishment. You either had family and you worked up through connections, or you had a lot of money and you bought your way in, or you worked your way up. You know, some people actually were able to work their way up from coffee, intern, lugging coffee around for the big boys, to somebody who was one of these big political personalities. So, not the most efficient way to find the good talent, right? Because what would happen is that your best talent doesn't want to sit there and lug coffee around for anybody. They're gonna go out in the private sector. They're gonna make a lot of money. They're gonna do what you guys are doing. They're not gonna sit around with a party and make nothing and not be treated with any respect because you're not part of the in crowd. And so we, as a movement, progressive movement, have been losing a lot of this talent, a lot of the best and brightest in our movement. Conservatives, on the other hand, have been very, very effective at nurturing that talent and pulling it into their system. So rather than losing, what they're doing is they're actually out there recruiting from corporate America, pulling them into their movement, and they pay them well, and they nurture them, and they mentor them. And so what you have is a machine that is extremely up-to-date, technologically super advanced. The stuff they did with the voter targeting, demographic targeting of voters this last cycle was absolutely phenomenal. They're able to go into districts that are heavily Democratic and find the 10–20% of the people in that district that vote Republican and get them out to the vote. And Democrats, what we were doing last cycle is we were going into districts that were only 70 to 75% Democratic, and then just trying to get everybody out to vote. So yeah, you get to 75% Democrats, but you can also get some 20–25% Republicans to go along with it. And then you're ignoring everybody else. And the vast majority of this country isn't 75% Democratic performance. So the Democratic Party has failed to communicate with their supporters and with people who are persuadable in just about 80% of the country, huge swaths of the country. Republicans are in every single district. They're communicating everywhere. And that is a very dramatic change. And what enables them to do that is technology. I mean, there was no way to do that before the internet, before this revolution that you guys are a part of, and we're now kind of riding that wave. That did not exist before. Now they've been able to adapt to that and move quickly in that regard. Our side is back in the Stone Age, right? Because you have this cabal of consultants that are doing things a certain way that make a lot of money. They don't want things to change because they fear what's different, and they fear that they have to bring in new people that may usurp their power or may infringe upon their little fiefdoms. And so, for us, it's kind of, in a lot of ways, it's frustrating to see that they have embraced their innovators and their entrepreneurs, and we have to actually beat them over the head with whether it's blogging or whether it's just blog. We have to beat them over the head for them to realize that they need to start changing the way they're doing business and adapt to the changing political and media and technological landscapes.
And they didn't want to change. We both worked on Howard Dean's campaign, and after the election, sort of our initial impulse was to bring about change inside the structure of the Democratic Party as an organization. So we're both at the forefront of pushing for Howard Dean's movement into the DNC. And for anyone that's following politics right now, you can see that Howard Dean's getting a lot of backlash for one of the key things that he advocates for, which is the 50-state program that he talks about, taking resources out of D.C., money that's raised, and decentralizing it and putting it back into the states and the party organization. And that really gets to the heart of what we talk about with people-powered politics, which is people at the very local level becoming engaged in political participation. And in many ways, it's the technology that allows that to happen. One of the things that I'd love to see happen is to make it as easy as someone to get involved at the local level of Democratic politics for a precinct meeting, say to be able to go to a website, tap in their zip code, and find out when the next precinct location meeting and where it's at. It would be really simple technology. It wouldn't take that hard to aggregate and make that happen. But if you went on and tried to find out where that's at, maybe in Seattle it's a little bit different because it's so tech savvy here, but most places in the country, I know I tried this when I lived up in Vermont, you just can't find out that information. It's so arcane, the people that have been in the political process in that Democratic Party structure.
That's on purpose. They don't want people to show up.
Yeah, that it's ossified, it's insular, and it's hard to break through that. But I think with technology we can do that, and that's what we wound up doing with Howard Dean. With that chair election, is we broadcasted all over the blogs that we were going to make a statement, and there were people in D.C. that said, "Over my dead body, would Howard Dean be chairman of the DNC?" But we organized nationally. The DNC had regional meetings in all 4 of the regions of the U.S. leading up to that election, and we had hundreds of people show up at these meetings where nobody ever showed up before. And we basically made a statement that, look, if you guys, you don't go along with this, then, we're on the outside, we'll break in by ousting you out of the party itself at the very precinct level. So there's been participation within the Democratic Party in terms of opening some of that up, but obviously Howard Dean was just one step in. There's a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, and, Howard Dean's at the top, so we had to break through the state parties and down to the county level. And, like Jerome says, you can't find information on how to take over your local party because it's on purpose. They don't want challengers. And they'd rather lose and carry their fancy little title because it makes them feel like big shit, rather than actually to have to work and do their jobs, which is to actually create more Democrats and start winning some elections. So one of the things that we've been advocating, we're hoping to do it maybe with Move On or maybe some people will take the initiative, is to create that kind of national database. I mean, kind of wiki style actually, where you tell people. I mean, Joe Trippi, who ran Dean's campaign, tells about how he took over the Santa Clara Democratic Party when he was in college, and him and 5 friends showed up, and they were the only people who showed up. So by default, they were it. I mean, all it takes is really to show up a lot of times, and from there they were able to grow, and that's how he got into politics. Also, he got elected because his name was Trippi, and he was running in 1966. So, yeah, that was a good name to have at the time. And again, to us, it's all about technology. I mean, we don't need to march on the streets. As far as I'm concerned, marching in the streets is useless. It's an old story. Nobody cares anymore. A bunch of people in the street. You think don't they have something better to do with their time than to march in the street over some stupid thing? But a bunch of people get online and they exert pressure online. To me, that seems to be more impressive. Because a lot of times, it's not one or the other. A lot of times, you create these narratives, like the Cindy Sheehan story in Texas. I mean, there was a narrative. It wasn't a big march. I mean, she ended up going that route, and that's when she jumped the shark, essentially. But that summer was pretty dramatic because she was just sitting, camped out in front of George Bush's right. The Cindy Sheehan story in Texas. I mean, there was a narrative. It wasn't a big march. I mean, she ended up going that route, and that's when she jumped the shark, essentially. But that summer was pretty dramatic because she was just sitting, camped out in front of George Bush's ranch, and the blogs were writing about it. Eventually, a couple of camera crews went down, and it kind of snowballed from there. So one of the things that the blogs were able to do is really create the buzz that allowed some of this media to have a hook to go down. So, technology. We're a media-saturated world now. Media's the future. Now with convergence, television, and the internet, I mean, it's going to be absolutely dramatic. So we're going from 500 channels to unlimited, to the entire internet on a television. So how are we as a movement going to take advantage of this? Are we going to let the Republicans once again take the lead and dominate that? And if you're a Republican, I'm sure there's some of you in here, that's what you're hoping. Right? You're hoping more of the same. And, for us, though, we're saying, we have the talent. I mean, Silicon Valley and up here and, New York, Silicon Valley, and all these tech centers are very heavily progressive, very heavily democratic. It's a crowd that maybe hasn't been as political in recent years, but that's been changing quite a bit lately. So why don't we harness that energy and that expertise and that power to build this next generation movement that will not only dominate and take over the Democratic Party, but will lead it to this more egalitarian system, more people driven, where they're not beholden to the corporate interests or beholden to people. And I'm convinced that at that point we're going to have a party that's going to start winning elections again. We win on the issues. We lose on the structure. We lose on infrastructure. So unless we turn that around, and it's going to be people like you guys, really. I mean, when we look at a lot of the advocacy stuff that has been very effective the last couple of years, a lot of it is a bunch of, a database guy getting together with maybe a Perl programmer or C++ and a designer, and they put together some kind of advocacy site, Boycott Sinclair, right? This was in 2004. Sinclair was going to run an anti-Kerry documentary. They own, 86 stations across the country, television stations. The night before the election, they were going to run an anti-Kerry, one of the Swift Boat veteran for the Truth ads. And they were able to, just these 3 guys got together, build Boycott Sinclair, and they were able to drive that into this incredible advocacy campaign that eventually tanked Sinclair's stock. And at that point, the investors got pissed, and they ended up forcing Sinclair to pull the documentary. So it's that sort of thing. It's getting people who know the chops, who know how to operate in this new world, this brave new world of technology and media, and getting involved in doing change, because it happens, and it's for people like you guys, and for us too. I mean, it's not as hard as it was once upon a time to get 1 million people to march on the mall in D.C. So to me, that's pretty exciting. It's a democratizing of activism, and it's a very tangible way to start trying to push the Democratic Party and the nation closer to where it really should be, as opposed to where it's at today.
The interesting thing on the marches is those the pro-immigration ones that they recently had.
Yeah.
In large part, it was done by MySpace organizing, but then on IMing, the walkout from school was all like text IMing back and forth between the students. So it was sort of a spontaneous march, but using new technology. So let's open it up to questions. I'm sure there's a bunch of them, so let's do that and take it from there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, in early March, I heard about the Democratic precinct conferences on the radio. Mostly I just for different kinds. When I went, I was looking up for my precinct to show up.
Did you take over?
Not to experience that here, but I did put in one thing for the theme about making better passenger rail a national priority.
Yeah.
And then this week, legislators Rodney Tom and Ross Hunter held a meeting with the public, supposedly, but only 2 of their staff, the 2 legislators, and 5 members of the public showed up.
Yeah, there's not a lot of participation, so it's very easy to jump right in and have a large voice within that political area.
But also, these offline meetings, a lot of times it's better to organize those online, because people are busy. People have responsibilities. It's a lot easier for them to get together on some kind of IM chat or a blog and discuss things. And once you get a big enough crowd that's involved, naturally they're going to want to take it offline. It's a lot of what we're seeing with our Daily Coast MIDD communities is they're starting to organize themselves and meeting offline because they want to have that face-to-face influence. But all the first connections are all made online. It's a much safer environment. I'm very antisocial. I would have a hard time going to a meeting without knowing anybody. I mean, I'd be in a corner, really scared of myself. So blogging, right? So the technology has been absolutely fantastic for me. And this technology was made for me. It's made for, I think most people are like that. And so it's safe, and it's also easier for elected officials. They don't have to be on publicly, right? They can not have to tie and have to have that fake politician smile. They can do it in kind of a safe environment. And once they get enough interest, then you start taking those things offline. But the technology really enables a lot of these connections to be made in ways that is easier and more convenient for people than having to actually go to an actual meeting.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I supported Dean last time around, and from where I sat at the time, I really felt like he didn't get the nomination because the party bosses didn't want him to have it, fundamentally. Now you guys are saying that, well, it's the technology and that infrastructure that matters, but then on the flip side, he was the guy that had technology and infrastructure. So can you comment on where's the disconnect, and why do you think that he really failed to achieve the nomination?
Well, there's sort of the intersection there of when the technology is accessible and is used by enough people to be like a tipping point to affect the outcome. And I don't think we were at that point last cycle. And I'm not sure exactly when we will be there. I mean, in terms of usage in the internet, we're still only at maybe 15% that people go to predominantly the internet for their political news, so it's still pretty small in that sense. But we do talk a lot about, though, that in the book, that takedown of Howard Dean in Iowa, with specifically one of Markos' arch enemies, the DLC.
It's when we talk about infrastructure, it's more than just having a great blog and having a great website. I mean, there's a whole overarching infrastructure that the right has. They have the think tanks that generate the ideas and mold them into a governing blueprint. Then they have their media machine, Fox News and Rush Limbaugh and 700 Club and Washington Times and Free Republic and on and on and on, that allows them to market those ideas to their base. They reach roughly a third to half of their base with their media machine every week. We don't have the ability to reach millions of people with the partisan liberal media. It doesn't exist. Blogs Air America, you know, the little bits here and there, but we really don't have that mass capability of really pushing our message and marketing it. And they have the party infrastructure, which is what we were talking about earlier, the consultants and the ability, the databases and the sophisticated demographic targeting and that sort of thing, that allows them to sell those ideas to the American public when that sale is made, which is on election day. So this is broad. I mean, the Republicans spent hundreds of millions of dollars a year on this machine. It's very ideological, it's very cohesive, and it works together on behalf of their cause. We have nothing even remotely like that. We've started building it essentially last year, 2 years ago. We've started building it essentially last year, 2 years ago. And Kerry losing actually was one of the best things that happened to the progressive movement, ironically, because it finally drove home to a lot of people who were living in denial that, okay, there really is a problem with us because we really were right on the issues. And people did not like Bush. They did not like the direction of the country, and he still won. So clearly, and we had money. We actually had more money than they did. So all these excuses that we've had for so long suddenly got thrown out the window, and we still lost. So this is when people started realizing, okay, you know, we got to start changing the way we do business. So that's more party movement-based infrastructure. Now, in primary campaigns, you really don't have a party infrastructure. Generally, you know, you have a kind of an establishment, the media people, and the labor unions, and so on and so on. And yeah, they did. I mean, like Jerome said, we talk about that in the book about how they worked to take down Howard Dean. But at the end of the day, I think Dean did not fail because of infrastructure. We gave him the volunteers, we gave him the money, right? What they couldn't do is actually close the deal. They had horrible television media, they had horrible ground operation. You know, shipping in these kids into Iowa with their orange hats and telling Iowans how they should vote, when people are like, who the hell are you to tell me what Iowans should do, right? It's just a terrible, terrible idea. And so there was a lot of structural problems. Had they had a semi-decent, competent campaign with the volunteers we gave them and with the money we gave them, it would have been a whole different story. George Bush still would have won. And Howard Dean losing that election would have been an actual 10 steps back for what we're trying to do, because they would have said, we tried it your way and we still lost. So we'll go back to what we were doing before. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of fortuitous that he did not win, in much the same way that Barry Goldwater, when he lost in 1964, that actually energized his troops in this modern conservative movement to take over their party. So had Goldwater won, things may have turned out differently. So it's interesting how by losing twice, we actually probably won in the long term. I'm rationalizing here. I'm looking for a silver lining. Work with me.
I was very active up here during the last election cycle, and what I saw truly horrified me in that there were people who wanted to work. There were people who came in through the precinct caucuses, there were people who came into the county convention, and there was nothing in the local party apparatus to be able to put them into something functional. I spent 20 hours a week calling people who'd already been called and knocking on doors that had already been talked to. And up here, we have to change the way the local party infrastructure is working. And the fact that that King County is going to mail-only ballot, it can only help, because they will stop trying getting people out to do the day of the election doorbell, which was a complete waste of hundreds of people's efforts. And I haven't read your book yet, but I'm going to. Do you have any more suggestions in here for how we take and actually force change in the party infrastructure where it's already existing, to be able to take advantage of the energy that does exist?
Well, yeah, I'll talk about Colorado, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, one of the one of the huge problems we had in 2004 were people who were being harassed, right? Because they had the party people knock on our door, then they had NARAL come knock on our door, and then they had Sierra Club knock on our door, and by the time that I think probably turned off a huge number of people, enough to sway the election, maybe not, but we also wasted a lot of resources by knocking on the same door over and over again. So it was double negative. What happened in Colorado, this is, and we write about this in the book, and it's a great example. Colorado is a state that Bush won fairly handily, and Democrats made huge gains in the state legislature. In the House, they targeted 16 seats, they won 15 of them. I mean, it was a dramatic takeover of the state government. And what they did is the issue groups they had several donors in common. There's 4 big donors in Colorado that fund pretty much everything. They forced the issue groups into a room and said, you're going to start working together. We're going to figure out how we're going to stop duplicating efforts. We're going to start stepping on each other's toes, and we're going to build a movement. And they got together with the party, and what they decided in Colorado was the party was going to take care of message and candidate recruitment. Nothing else, right? The issue groups were going to focus on turnout and the ground game. And then those issue groups actually split up geographic zones, so they weren't going into each other's turf. And so they were able to be very efficient in the way they used those resources, and clearly huge, huge success. This is now a model that's being emulated. The people, the architects of this are traveling around the country, and you can't do cookie cutter. Every place is different. One thing, we were in Texas at a meeting, and these issue groups got together, and they've been fighting forever. And they decided at this meeting that they were actually going to start sharing their membership lists and start figuring out how to work together. But here, you know, the difference there was that the groups were going to force the donors to say, okay, now help us make this happen. So every state has its different dynamics. There's no cookie cutter approach. We criticize the cookie cutter approach in politics, so we're not going to advocate it. But the idea is a lot of that duplications because people are not talking with each other. And you know, in Texas, you know, the NARAL president for NARAL Texas, you know, when I asked her, are you guys for serious? This is really happening. And she said, you know, at this point, what do we have to lose? And in a lot of places in this country, that's a sentiment. What do we have to lose? And we've essentially hit rock bottom. I mean, we can only go up from here, I think, right? I hope. Otherwise, I'm going to go kill myself right now. And you don't want to be in the news on that one, right? And so, but that's the key. It's who the groups here. It's who. Why was that being duplicated? Was it the party at risk? Take over the party. Was it the issue groups? You know, start impressing on them the importance. Show them the examples of what can happen if people do start working together. And I think long term, it'll help solidify states like Washington, which shouldn't even been a toss-up last time, and you know it was for most of the election. And we can start actually making some gains in some of these other purple and red states. Did that answer your question? Kind of. Go ahead.
On the Colbert Report the other night, he asked you...
Last night.
He asked you what you thought about 06, and you said that you didn't really expect that the Democrats would win much. And so I guess my question would be, if not, with the way that Bush's numbers are now and not 06, then when do you see this movement that you guys are trying to foster actually gaining the traction necessary to make a change, if not 06, with the way Bush is now?
Markos is still pessimistic. Let's hope he's a contrary indicator. He thought we were going to win last time.
Yeah,
so.
last few cycles, I was convinced we were going to win, so I'm kind of hoping my streak holds. And I'm always wrong. I mean, I think we'd be in great shape if I'm wrong again.
Now, I think the main problem that we point out is, well, there's a couple of them actually. The Democrats are up against a huge wall, and that the Republicans have done all these things, what we call backlash insurance, such as gerrymandering and reapportioning seats throughout the nation, so that even though the Democrats are up nationally 10 or 13, I think, in the recent poll, % above the Republicans in terms of who would people vote for, you know, for their congressional representatives. And if you look at the individual races across the nation, it's much more difficult for the Republicans to gain a majority. But then the other problem is that the Democrats on a national level haven't done a good job at saying, this is how we differ from the Republicans. This is the distinction between us and them. And I think the reason why they haven't done that is because for so long, many decades, the Democratic Party was the party of governing. They saw themselves as the natural majority in this country. And so they sort of viewed their effort as more of consensus building and not really partisan in nature. But now they're in the opposition. And for an opposition party to gain power, they have to be able to say why they shouldn't have power. It can't be just the Republicans are corrupt. It can't be just the Republicans can't govern. They have to. They might win by default, who knows? But even if they win, what have they really won? They haven't won a mandate because they haven't really stood for anything and made the distinctions between what a Democrat stands for as opposed to what Republicans are governing.
You saw how easy Colbert treated me. I mean, he was stumping me by asking me like regular questions. So that was kind of nice. Yeah, no, Jerome's right. What I'm seeing as I talk to people is, and I said we're seeing the early elections this year, some primary special elections, is Democratic turnout is absolutely in the dumpsters right now. They're not turning out. They've been burned last 3 elections. So they're like, well, Republicans don't care that we exist. I mean, Republicans have made it very clear that if you're 48% that voted for Kerry, you don't exist. Democrats can't get elected, and they keep breaking my heart, so why should I get invested in another election so they can break my heart again? I'm just going to tune out. And that's what we're seeing. And it doesn't hurt when Democrats in D.C. are basically saying, shh, don't say anything, because their Republicans are doing a good job of killing themselves. And they are. Nobody wants to vote for Republicans. But we still need to get people to want to vote for Democrats. Otherwise, nobody's going to turn out and vote. And we're going to make gains just by default. I mean, the map shows that we're going to make gains. Is it enough to take over Congress? I don't think so at this point. And it could be. I mean, we could be looking at a major wave election. But only if people, first of all, our base has an incentive to turn out and vote. Theirs doesn't. Theirs is absolutely not going to vote. If we can give our people a reason to vote, that's what's going to win the election. It's not going to be trying to appeal to the moderate, middle, whatever. They don't vote anyway, right? And if they don't have incentive enough to vote against the Republicans after the mess they've made, then we're not going to get them. So let's try to get our people motivated and turn out to vote.
I had breakfast with a congressional candidate, and two things came out of that was really interesting. One was that she saw only 40 seats are up for play.
Yeah, comparatively, yeah.
And the second thing was she just is not willing to go and state and really be transparent on her blog and really give us a look at her life and her ideas and really lead the country, show some leadership, because she knows every word she writes there or shares with us is going to be used against her. And how do you change that? How do you get a new kind of candidate that really, that's where I got sad with Dean, was at the end of the day I knew that he wasn't blogging. He didn't believe in talking to me.
Well,
you guys believed in talking to me.
Howard Dean just got a computer like in 2002, so.
But he also got beat up every time he opened his mouth up, and I think after a while he started kind of becoming risk averse. And as he became the front runner, then naturally, when you're an insurgent, you can say whatever you want. You're trying to make news. When you're the front runner and you're making news, it's probably a bad thing. So that's it's actually a structural defect right now in our political system. It's a problem. To me, I like to point to the Ohio 2nd special election last year with Paul Hackett. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this race, but this is a district outside of Cincinnati, heavily conservative. Bush won with 63%, 64%.
Yeah, big time.
And special election, the Democratic Party says, that's a Bush district, we're not even going to bother contesting it, so who cares, right? Paul Hackett runs, Iraq War veteran. And he's running a very, very aggressive campaign. And since there's no party money, they can't muzzle him. Because when party money comes in, they send their consultants, and they'll say, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about that, right? So he's in his district where Bush has his incredible approval rating, and he's calling Bush a son of a bitch. He's ragging on the Iraq War. When they asked him about gay marriage, he said, if they want to get married, all the power to them. And if you disagree, then you're un-American. And suddenly he's competitive. People love him, and he barely lost. The Republicans had to come in and dump $500,000 at the last minute to really basically bail out their hapless candidate. And to me, it's a great example, because had that money come in from the party, they would have said, no, don't criticize Bush. You got 63%. Oh, don't criticize the war. People here like the war. Oh, don't talk about gay marriage and social issues. Don't talk about those things. What we're finding is that when Democrats talk about those things and they have strong moral foundation upon which those beliefs are held, people respect that. And not only does it win votes, but it motivates people who aren't voting to actually come out and vote. And that's the kind of campaigns that we've been advocating for, and that's why he was such an incredible case study for us, because that was exactly what we were saying needed to happen. But we still have this consulting class in D.C. that controls the whole process, and they have such a stranglehold in the political system that they're not going to let their candidates do that. Nancy Farmer ran for Senate in Missouri. She won as state treasurer on part by advocating for universal health care. The D.C. consultants came in and said, you can't talk about universal health care, this is a red state. She had won the last election. She had won with a team that was based on Missouri consultants. The National Party kicked them all out and put their people from D.C. Had no idea what Missouri was like, how Missouri's, how to talk to people from Missouri, how to sell a candidate to the people of Missouri. She had that experience. She had won statewide already. So this is the sort of thing that we're up against. And it's a long-term process. I mean, when we look at the Republicans, they built their machine over 30 years, their movement over 30 years. We just started, like I keep saying, we started a couple of years ago. It's going to take a while. Technology and advances in technology, I think, will help us really kind of shrink that down. But a lot of it is just a learning process. We got to train them to realize that they can take risks, that they don't have to. It's the old notion of nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. That's what we're seeing in campaigns. We're going to do the safe thing. when a lot of times in a lot of these districts, you can't do the safe thing. You got to actually, throw the Hail Mary, and you're more likely to win the game that way than, trying to run the ball up the middle. And that's a horrible sports analogy, and I lost it. So let's pretend I never said that and move on.
Let me just actually get to the first part of that question real quick. That we only have 40 seats. That's a pretty high estimate, actually, of what the number that the National Democratic Party is going to challenge. And there are 232, I think, reps. 230. 235? No, representatives of the Republicans. I think it's 233. Democrats have 202. And anyway, so there's 230-something of Republicans that are running for re-election, and the Democratic Party at the national level is targeting about 40 of those, and that's a charitable estimation. The number is probably closer to about 20. So they're leaving over 200 of them with an easy re-election. And what happens? Those guys go out and raise money, and they shovel it over to the really contested elections. And so the Democrats will complain, like, we can't fund candidates into these races which look like really long shots because it'll cost us our money that we have to spend on these contested races. And then meanwhile, those guys turn right around, raise money there because they're not being contested, and put it into the contested races. And what we wrote about was 2 examples where the Netroots strategy, which was identifying these long shot races and trying to fund them and get some early funding into them so where they could turn around, actually become competitive. The two examples we use are Tom DeLay and Marilyn Musgrave. Tom DeLay was running in Texas. The D.C. Democrats have written it off, and a guy named Morrison was a long shot race that we got behind, and he actually started the whole thing, which culminated this last week with Tom DeLay stepping down finally by strongly challenging him in his own district. Another race was Marilyn Musgrave in Colorado. Democrats were not
vicious homophobe in the Senate.
Yeah, her issues
vicious,
were just
vicious, evil hater.
They weren't going to back her at all. They were just going to let her ride. And she had what was her bankroll? $3 million.
She had $3 million, and which would have gone to other anti-gay candidates across the nation. She was ready. She was campaigning around the country because she was pushing this hate amendment, this federal anti-marriage amendment, whatever. And so she was actually campaigning for people around the country and giving them money. And suddenly, we raised what?
Was it Matsunaka, right?
Matsunaka. We raised $600,000.
Yeah, not that much. Like 600. He raised less than $1 million in the whole race, and 600,000 was Netroots based and sort of like funders that came from the grassroots support. But the Republicans
she spent all her money, and then the Republicans had to dump another $2 million to bail her out. And
and that was money that couldn't go to those other competitive races. So I think that the argument that they can't field candidates because of the money and the resources just doesn't pan out.
A lot of that is a game of chess. You're trying to pin him down.
Yeah.
An incumbent will spend 10 times the money of a challenger to make sure that he's not going anywhere, she's going to be safe. And we need to use that to our advantage. And Democrats are, they see everything in win-loss. And if some of you follow the blog world, I get mocked a lot for my win-loss record, right? But the win-loss record isn't my motivation. I mean, we're not trying to win these races. That's why we're going with...
What is it, 3-14?
3-17.
Okay.
And the key is to pin them down, expand the playing field, is wave the Democratic Party flag in districts that haven't seen it in ages. And in that regard, it has been successful. Republicans had to spend a lot more money to offset the relatively small amounts that we raised. And kept that money in their district, kept the candidates in their district. Tom DeLay, for the first time since he first got elected in Congress in '86 or '88, actually opened up a district campaign office. He hadn't even bothered to go back to his district since he first had gotten elected. He had to open up a campaign office and spent the entire cycle in his district instead of out raising money for other people.
Somebody told me he's actually moving to Virginia now. He's leaving lobbyists probably or something like that. Yeah. But the other part of this equation is that the Democratic Party uses slogans like putting people first and together, well, whatever. I don't know what exactly. Together something. And, it's this all-inclusive type of slogan stuff, but then when we get to the election, we blow off half the people at the presidential level. We go after eight targeted battleground seats, or we just go after 40 districts. So we're blowing off huge swaths of the country. We're telling progressives in these rural areas that, you know what, it's unwinnable, forget you. We're not even going to find a candidate that you can, back and help build up the Democratic Party to hopefully win there someday. So that's really where we talk about the long-term structure of building up the Democratic Party at a national level, again, so that once again we can be a national party, that we have to, fix these areas.
Yeah, it's incredible. You know, we're in this book tour. We're doing over 100 events. You know, I think we're up to 40 cities right now. I mean, this is not a normal book tour, right? Normal book tour is, you know, 6, 10 cities, right? And we're still getting emails from people like in Alabama saying, please come. You know, we got a couple hundred really committed activists. Nobody pays any attention to us. Please, please come. They want validation. They want somebody to say, you know what, you matter. Your work and efforts matter, even though you're in this really red area of the country. And, you know, it breaks my heart that we can't go to every place because, you know, there's limits to what we can do. But that's a kind of hunger that we have out there. And that's a kind of hunger that's not being met by the national party or even the state parties. So.
One nice thing about your blog is you can link to them and point out, hey, we do care about you. You know, even at some abstract level, I can't visit you. But
right.
We've done that here at Moulitsas by looking at people who hate us and talk about us. It completely changes the discourse out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've been talking with Dave with Horses Ass. See, there's a plug, horsesass.com. Local blogger, and that's really where the you know, it's .org.
Yeah,
sorry.
Okay.
Don't go to .com. Go to .org. But no, it's the local blogospheres too that are going to get built up, and you know, to date we've just seen really a few states break out in that, and Washington's one of them, where their local blogs have impacted the media and issues in elections. But that's going to happen more often. Go ahead.
From your vantage point, can you talk a little bit about the 2004 campaigns, Kerry and Bush campaigns, and their use of the blogosphere and how they compared and contrast, both on their own, you know, their own websites, or how they interacted with the blogosphere, like through blogs from Bush?
Well, the Kerry campaign had a guy named Peter Dow who was actually had a lot of pull with John Kerry personally. He was a friend of him, and he was at the same time became sort of infatuated with the blogosphere and really reached out to the bloggers.
But he came late.
Came late was one part of the problem, and the other part of the problem was that everybody on the campaign thought he was kind of a little bit out there. Even though he had access, even though he was able to reach out to us, actually executing a strategy and making that matter was difficult for him. On Bush's side, their Netroots outreach effort was more towards an Amway style of organizing, where they'd get one person to go out and find 10 people that would, for sure, find 10 other people that would vote, in sort of this pyramidal structure of making sure that people turned out to vote on election day. And it was really quite effective. I think I heard Karl Rove said they had like 250,000 people doing that on election day all throughout the nation.
Yeah, it's putting, you know, from a structural standpoint, their use of the technology is still this top-bottom approach, right? We're gonna use it as a way to send marching orders, and you're gonna follow us, and you're gonna, and progressives, you know, one of the weaknesses of the progressive movement has always been the fact that it's so, you know, disunified, ununified. What's the word? There's a word.
Decentralized?
And nobody wants to, you know, everybody has their ideas, and everybody, you know, so there's this, like, okay, we're going to follow that leader. It just does not happen. But we finally have a medium that really kind of embraces that and plays to that strength. And so we can all argue and fight and, you know, tell each other how stupid we are. But then the election time comes and we can all get together. All right, okay, we'll support Kerry. And as soon as we lose, oh, Kerry was the biggest dick in the world. And God, I'm so glad he's gone. But we got together when it mattered. And so, in a lot of ways, it does play to our strengths. But it's interesting, you know, technology is technology, right? And you can mold it to your uses. And it's interesting how we're using it to build community, and they're using it to just be an extension of their existing media machine.
Don't you contribute some of your success to the lack of the message by the centralized Democratic Party?
It's not a lack of message. I think it's a lack of voice. I remember when we started in 2002, I mean, there was no partisan liberal media. It did not exist. And, you know, conservatives talk about the liberal media, which is, you know, the myth. And so to the point where the media is actually going right because they're so afraid of being accused of being liberal that they actually overcompensate. And so in 2002, this was right after the Afghanistan war, run up to the Iraq war, there were no liberal voices. There's not a single voice out in the media landscape that was saying this war is BS and what they're saying doesn't add up, you know, except, you know, us tiny little bloggers with a couple hundred readers a day. And it was precisely because we were the only voices in that landscape that were being partisan and liberal at the time, I think is what drove our growth. Otherwise, had there been I mean, we're seeing it in places like Greece and London, where there's really partisan media. The newspapers are all partisan. They're all very, you know, they skew ideologically. There's no political blogosphere. This does not exist because there's no need for it.
Yeah, sure, the vacuum. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd be curious in your candid assessment of how well you guys and your message is being received by the DC punditocracy and the folks who have their hands on the levers of power. Because it seems like there's an inevitable struggle for the heart and soul of the Democratic Party coming within, I don't know, the next year or two. And there's the DLC.
Oh, 2007, the primaries next year. Yeah.
The DLC types and the consultant classes are going to be threatened by your message. And it's nice to see Nancy Pelosi drive by and post on your blog, and the participation from people of that level of power. But I haven't seen any evidence that they've completely embraced the from the bottom up model that you seem to be suggesting is the path to victory. How are you being received by those folks, other than on the surface?
It's been weird because we expected a huge backlash to this. We thought it was going to be a really controversial book, and it's been anything but. Charlie Cook, who's the dean of the DC Political Press Corps, called it one of the 2 best books about the Democratic Party he's read in years, and the other one being God's Politics by Jim Wallace. We had a guy who New York Times. Peter Beinart. Oh, yeah. Peter Beinart, a year ago, he was the editor of the New Republic. He called for the expulsion of the party from people like the Move On folk and the bloggers and Michael Moore. And suddenly, the New York Times assigns him our book to review it for their book section, expecting fireworks, obviously. And when first heard about it, I was like, they fucked us. They totally fucked us. He actually wrote this incredible, it was a tepid review. He couldn't go out and really embrace it. He wanted to kick me out of the party last year. But the fact that there was grudging respect there, it's like, okay, these guys, maybe they do have something to offer. So we're seeing it with the issue groups that we criticized. We expected a huge backlash there, and they're actually, like in Texas, where they said, they actually took the advice and the criticism to heart and are now working to bridge those differences and to do the sort of things that happened in Colorado, where they were able to make huge gains. So I think we're at this point in a lot of ways where we have this what do we have to lose moment, and here's something that gives us at least some roadmap to how do we get out of this, so we're going to give it a shot. And so it hasn't been as controversial. Now, as far as the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, and that's...
Well, at the end of the day, that's where the change has got to happen.
Yeah.
You're right in pinpointing it there, because we can complain about the consultants all we want, about the interest groups, but if it's the politicians, the candidates, who aren't demanding that it be done differently, then it's going to continue, at least in the campaign and election process. Right. So that's where the pressure has to be put.
But we got 2 out of the 3. We got the consultants, and we got the press people, and so now we just got to get the politicians. So not the now we get the consultants. We got the issue groups, and the political press. So now we got to get the politicians. The consultants are laying low. Anytime anybody sticks their head up and criticizes a blogger, we pummel them to death, and then publicize their client list, and then we pummel their clients, and so it's kind of like, yeah, we're not going to say anything.
I was at a I work as a consultant in D.C. with internet strategy a lot with these people, and I was having pollsters come up and autograph their book in D.C. the other day. It was just weird.
Some of these pollsters were people that were in the original version of the book, and we cut out as we were just trimming the book down.
Trimmed it down. I was like, you're so lucky.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I would have liked to see more of that in your book. The heartbreaking sections of the book where you're talking about all the money, the millions of dollars that got burned during the Kerry campaign on these useless television ads that don't work, that weren't focus grouped properly, blah, 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 blah. I would have liked to see more names named to put those people out of business, because I think a lot of us in this room donated so much money back to your own.
I know. Yeah, for us it was a matter of balance. There were so many, when we went around and talked with everybody had, one issue that they wanted to get in, and we had a lot more. I'll send you some of the clips that we have in your email. But, it was just a matter of editing it down to where it was a book where people could read and pass along to people that didn't necessarily know how politics worked.
Because when you start naming too many names, it becomes really inside baseball, and then you start losing. We were trying to make it as readable as possible.
We got the big one in. Shrum's in there. He's not going to work next cycle.
And Amy Sullivan wrote this great article in the Washington Monthly about the consultants, fire the consultants, and we're really putting a lot of pressure on her to actually make that into a book, because she's got names, and this needs a book. It's not making the chapter a little bit bigger. It needs a whole book on its own.
Right. Each one of those issues that we lay out. I think it was Simon Rosenberg, once he read the book early on, that said this is sort of like, it's a very top level look at a lot of the structural problems that we face as a party, and each one of them that could be, you know, a book in their own. Not by us.
I'm wondering, when are we going to start seeing more leadership in the Democratic Party? I feel like with the Republicans, it's the Congress, it's the senators, it's the White House. But with the Democratic Party, it's the bloggers, the actors, the comedians, you know, you guys, which is great if you guys want to run for president. But
yeah, but we don't.
But when are we going to start transferring, you know, all this sort of leadership into actual candidates? And
I have a couple theories, and they're theories. They've had this machine, this conservative machine, for so long that if a Democrat showed any kind of leadership, went out on a limb, they got pummeled, and there was nobody on the left to push back. So it was just absolute agony.
The other thing is their two formative experiences are losses of 94 and 72.
Right. So they're risk averse for that reason, right? Because those are really big losses. So there's that, and there's also the fact that the Republican Party has for a long time been funded by small dollar donations. People think Democrats are the party of the people. We actually had, the only place where we beat the Republicans in money-wise was in $1 million plus donations. We actually got the big fat cat corporate donations. We got them, not them. And they had the small dollar donor base. Best thing that happened to us was campaign finance reform. It was supposed to kill the Democratic Party because we were losing those $1 million donations. What it forced them to do is actually reconnect with regular people. Now what that does, I think, and again this is theory, is that when Republicans are dependent on that small dollar donation for their operations, they have to be responsive to their base. Because if they're not, they're going to lose that money. Democrats have not had the need to be responsive to their base because they didn't need their money. They just needed their vote every once in a while. And so now that they actually need their money, I think that long term, as they slowly get trained, it's a training process, right? That they're going to have to step it up on the leadership front, yes.
Eventually they will. So that's the end. We've been told no more questions. Sorry. We are doing a couple more events. They're on crashingthegate.com.
And we're still here. We're going to be here another half hour. So if you guys, we're going to sign. And if you guys have questions, feel free to. And books are over there if you don't have them.